In 1973, NBC got a script that would have put America's best detective up against a killer who had no reason to kill. Bosses at the network got scared and locked it up. They said it was too dark to watch TV. They said the people would not be ready. But there was a much darker reason why this Columbo story was kept secret for 50 years. We're going to show what they tried to hide today. When a writer's strike shut down Hollywood in early 1960, two poor screenwriters, Richard Levinson and William Link, had to work extra hours to make ends meet. But they didn't wait it out. Instead, they found a sneaky way around it. They found out that the strike limits didn't cover live TV. They went for it. For NBC's new live color show, The Chevy Story Show, they wrote a murder story called Enough Rope. So eager to sell it, they even lied to their own agent to help them. But something amazing was born in that jumbled writing. Lieutenant Columbo, a messy and strange detective, they had no idea that this last-ditch effort would become famous all over the world. Character wasn't even completely unique. They had been reading Crime and Punishment by D. Dostoevsky. They got the idea from Porfiry Petrovich, the detective in that book, a soft-spoken guy who seemed harmless but was really smart. In that way, they wanted Columbo to be. They chose to show the killer right at the beginning instead of toward the end like most stories do. Seeing how Columbo, with all his quirks and questions, would slowly catch them was what made the story exciting. People loved it because it was smart, new, and psychological. There was no such thing as a first Columbo. The part was played by Bert Freed in a live show on July 31, 1960. The quiet, careful work he did was good, but the real magic wasn't coming for years. After 2 years, the story was turned into a play called Prescription Murder. Thomas Mitchell played Columbo in the play. People liked it, but it never made it to Broadway. Mitchell's last part before he died would be that sad one. But 1968 was a big year for change. NBC picked up Prescription Murder to be a TV movie, and Peter Falk was chosen this time. He wasn't the first choice, Lee J. He was the best choice for the part, even though Cobb and Bing Crosby both said no. Columbo got something new from Falk, a strange beauty mixed with a very sharp focus. He looked pretty clean, cut in that first movie, his hair was neat. His suit was pressed, but the famous raincoat made its appearance and stayed around for a long time. That coat, Falk bought it himself in New York during a storm for only $15. He wore it in the movie and did not stop. It turned out to be more than just a coat. In fact, a high-end Spanish company made it. But for Falk it was the right look. He began to bring his own clothes to work. The clothes, the shoes, and even the car. He chose that dirty old Peugeot himself. All of this helped make the agent seem real, not like he or she was dressed up by a wardrobe team. The way Falk played Columbo made him even more interesting. He wasn't going for it. He had fun with our minds. When Falk forgot his lines or got distracted in the middle of a scene, it threw off the actors who were meant to be guilty. It worked. They looked tense and annoyed, just like their roles called for. He could show a shopping plan instead of proof or ask to borrow a pencil for no reason. It wasn't a mistake. These were tricks. The audience knew what was going on, but not the performers. That made watching Columbo even more fun. There's also the line, "One more thing." That phrase wasn't part of some brilliant plan. They both said that they only added it because they didn't want to retype a scene that was too short. Columbo was told to say it when he came back into the room. That was the start of TV's most famous secret agent move. What began as a quick fix turned into a signature move that usually meant the killer was going to die. The Columbo figure was so unique that no one knew what his name was. People never really knew his first name all those years. Frank Columbo was sometimes shown on a hazy badge, but the people who made him said they never gave him a first name. They wished it would stay that way. Someone named Fred Worth made up Philip Columbo as a fact to catch people who were copying, and Trivial Pursuit believed him, so he sued them. Even though he lost, the story lived on. Everyone just called him Officer, even at the wedding of Columbo's nephew. It would be weird if your family didn't even call you by your first name. In the background, the casting process was just as tough. The killers were played by guest stars in each show, and the cast often looked at dozens of actors for those roles. It was even thought that Orson Welles and Peter Sears might be good for one part. They couldn't take the sellers' high prices. Falk himself turned down some ideas. He told Danny Kaye no, but he never said why. When Columbo was first being planned in 1971, NBC officials were not sure if it would work. In fact, they were afraid that TV back then had rules. People might have switched channels if the hero hadn't shown up right away. But Richard Levinson and William Link, who made Columbo, didn't care about the rules. People in the crowd had to wait for Columbo for almost 30 minutes. That length of time had never been seen before, and officials called it the longest stage wait in the history of TV. They were sure that people would get bored and leave. What happened next, though, flipped the whole mystery genre on its head. This show didn't ask who did it, but instead told you right away who the killer was. That was the catch. You saw the murder happen. You saw that the plan was put together with great care. After that, you watched as this shy and quiet agent slowly broke down that plan. When people found out who the killer was, they thought the tension would go away, but it didn't. It made everything worse. He started to play a game about how to catch them instead of if he would. Columbo also didn't use guns or follow people in cars. He was polite, used common sense, and had an eye for small things like a wine glass smudge or a setting that was too low. That being said, there was something else that made Columbo so strong. It had to do with class. Columbo did not have a lot of money. He smoked cheap cigars, wore the same worn coat every day, drove a beat-up car, and talked about his wife all the time. He went after surgeons, stars, CEO, generals, and other important people who thought they would never get caught. They were never treated like they were important by Columbo. In fact, he often made them feel bad. To see how they would respond, he would ask how much their pricey painting cost or say that his wife had something similar at home. Columbo made sure the rich didn't think they were safe because the show showed them in a quiet way. NBC tried to step in at one point. They told the people who made it to change the format after only a few shows. They wanted Columbo to show up earlier and for the story to be told in a more classic way, but the team said no. The people who didn't back down were Levinson, Link, the director, William Furman, and even Peter Falk himself. They said they would quit before making changes to the show's subject. It was very risky, but it paid off. People loved it. Scores went up and bosses backed off. Columbo was a unique show from the very first episode on September 15, 1971. It was shown on NBC as part of their mystery movie rotation, along with other mystery shows. But it quickly became the most popular. Peter Falk got an Emmy that season in large part because of how well he played his part. He won 5 more awards and a Golden Globe for the part over the years. Columbo will always be remembered for his messy charm and careful delivery. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't needed to be. Everything would fall apart for the killer as soon as he asked one more question. Because the show ran on NBC, episodes were sometimes 90 minutes long, which gave the writers more time to build drama and character. Columbo felt more like a movie than a TV show because it had that much space. And because it did so well, NBC moved it to Sunday nights, where it ruled the numbers. Columbo was no longer just a hit. He was now a prime-time host. Most people didn't think the show would go so far. It left the United States, all over the world. It had fans all over the world because it was shown in 44 countries. A figure of Columbo was made by fans in Hungary. People in Romania were so mad when the show stopped that Peter Falk had to record a message to let them know it wasn't picked up by the government. It was over now. Even after decades, the BBC still said it was timeless. It turned out that Columbo's quiet determination, his sense of right and wrong, and the pleasure he got from bringing down cocky criminals worked. Those things were important to everyone. Columbo made it an honor to catch killers, as shown by the guest stars. Well-known artists rushed to play the killer. It was done 3 times by Jack Cassidy. It was done twice by William Shatner. For his roles, Patrick McGoohan won Emmys. In one scene, Thomas Jane, Martin Landau, Leonard Nimoy, and Robert Culp all played twin killers. There was a stage for shows. Great people were drawn to the show even behind the scenes. Steven Spielberg directed the first regular show when he was 24 years old. Peter Falk knew right away that this person was too good for Columbo. Something strange took place in Hollywood in the summer of 1973. A rising director named Brian Dielma, who doesn't like TV at all, chose to write an episode for Columbo. This Dielma had just put out Sisters, a dark chiller that showed how much he loved Hitchcock-style stories. He was so inspired by Columbo, though, that he sent in a script with his friend Jay Cox, who is a well-known film critic. As if they were in on a secret joke, they even gave Jay a fake name, Joseph P. Gillies from Sunset Boulevard. Even stranger was the fact that all of this happened during a writer's strike, when the show really needed new episodes. Before, De Palma didn't like TV, but he went into a world he didn't like because he saw something different in this messy mystery show. They made up a crazy story. A director named Quentin Lee kills a talk show host and films the whole thing. Lee is clearly based on real people like Truman Capote. It wasn't just a murder, though. It was a sentence. Lee wanted to show that a crime with no reason could be the best kind of crime. He then throws a dart at a list of famous people in his building and picks someone he thinks is cheap and fake. He thinks they are not worth much and calls them a public zircon and a fake diamond. When he chooses to make a documentary about it and includes Columbo in it without telling the detective, his already crazy plan gets even stranger. It quickly turns meta. Not only that, but there are 3 students with cameras following Columbo. One of them was named Spielberg, a nod to the real Spielberg, who had already directed an early episode of the show. It wasn't a good time for De Palma, though. Producers were rushing because the strike had pushed the show's start date back. During the strike, Stephen J. Kell's Double Exposure was also sent in as a play. The movie was easier to make and had a bad guy who killed people with subliminal pictures. A cool idea, but it would be easier to carry out when time is limited. Dielma's writing was trickier to read because it had more layers of story and visual effects. The makers liked it, maybe even more than some of the episodes they made, but they didn't have the time or money to make it happen. It was later used to make other things, like the film student idea that was used in the episode Mind Over Mayhem. That version even had a character named Steven Spielberg. The name was spelled a little differently, but it was clear that it was a reference to what Dielma had written. The real trouble was the tone. Killers in Columbo usually had clear, selfish goals like getting money, power, or payback. That wasn't important to Dielma's bad guy. As an artistic project, he wanted to make a point of killing someone. People thought of Hitchcock's movie Rope, where the killers were sure they were smarter than everyone else. That wasn't what Columbo was about, though. It's likely that the makers thought viewers wouldn't connect with a character who was so cold and strange. They were strong, but they didn't fit the friendly Sunday evening feel of the show, watching people through cameras and blurring the line between truth and performance. Some people even thought about John Lithgow as the lead, but they were afraid that he was too big and scary for TV at the time. The show was put on hold in the end. Columbo had a plan that worked, even though he was under a lot of stress from production and artistic differences. At the start, the killer is shown. It's never about who did it. It's always about how Columbo will catch them. He was slow, smart, and polite, and he always knew what was going on. Then No Time to Die came out in 1992, and everything changed. At first, there was no murder and the investigation was not calm. Instead, there was chaos, screams, chloroform, and a disturbing kidnapping while the couple was on their honeymoon. It seemed more like a scary movie than an episode of Columbo. Columbo didn't use quiet reasoning. Instead, he worked with a police unit, carry a gun, and race against the clock. Gunfire finished the last few seconds. Fans of Columbo had never heard anything like it. Some people said it was bold. A lot of people said it was the worst show ever. It wasn't the only time the show went in a strange direction, though. Columbo came back in 1989, after 11 years, with an episode called Murder, Smoke, and Shadows, which was based on Hollywood movies and was way too dramatic. The bad guy was a young, flashy movie director who seemed more like a parody of Steven Spielberg than a real threat. Longer than 10 minutes went by while Columbo shook on a waterbed in one scene. Finally, police officers dressed up in costumes jumped out with music and flashlights, making it look like a stage show. It seemed more like a joke than a puzzle. Still, some fans later supported it because it was better than what came after in the revival years. Things got even stranger that year with a death and a self-portrait. Columbo solved the case by figuring out what the victim's strange dreams meant instead of putting together information. It was possible to see pocket watches in teacups, meat in a sink, and even a French uncle that meant monal. The killer was a selfish artist who lived with both of his wives until one of them died. A lot of the story was based on psychology and symbols, but it didn't make much sense. Columbo all of a sudden knew more than a skilled therapist, and the memories that were said to have been pushed down were not real. Even though the story didn't stick with him, the picture he got at the end did. When the year 2003 came around, Columbo was looking into raves. Yes, raving. Columbo Likes the Nightshirt was the last show ever made, and it tried to bring the messy detective into the present day. Instead of cigar smoke and quiet living rooms, there was loud music, bright lights, and a lot of sweaty dancers. Columbo wore a feather boa, went into bars, and even searched a toilet for a toenail clipping by hand. There was a murder, a cover-up, and a newspaper reporter in the story. But what most people remember about the event is how strange it seemed. It was shocking and awkward, but also strangely interesting. Some watchers loved how hard they tried to make him more modern. Some people just missed the good old days. Not every mistake was done on purpose to be strange. The movie Blueprint for Murder, which came out in 1972, was Peter Falk's first chance to direct. It was hard to shoot. He was mad that the producers gave him an episode that took place on a real building site just to make things harder. In order to get help, Falk called Spielberg and Yeats and even paid extras himself when the company wouldn't pay. The outcome was not even. The pace was all over the place, and there was no death shown on screen. First quickly, then slowly. It seemed strange that the same Brahms piece was played over and over again. Falk's acting was also bad. Having to do both jobs wasn't easy, and he never directed another show after that. Most Columbo fans thought that was the end of the road when Peter Falk played the role in the 2003 movie Columbo Likes the Nightlife. But that wasn't the plan behind the scenes. There was a quiet start to work on the 70th and final episode of Universal Studios in 2007. Title in progress, Hear No Evil, but it was quickly changed to Columbo's last case to make it clear. No, this wasn't just another puzzle. It was time to say goodbye. Falk wasn't ready to die yet. He was almost 80 years old. He wanted to look good as he left the stage, one last time in the rumpled coat that made him famous. A full 102-page plot was written with great care to make sure he got rid of Columbo in the right way. The time was just right. The figure had not been seen since 1968, which was 40 years ago. The story was just as smart as always. It was mostly about a high-tech murder that used sound. Something modern that still has the psychological turns that the show was known for. The first hint was a very small clicking sound that only Columbo could hear. It slowly put together the killer's plan. To make things even more interesting, Larry King played himself in a part in the script. Like when stars like Johnny Cash or Janet Leigh showed up out of the blue in the old days, it was meant to be a fun appearance. From the very beginning to almost the very end, the show felt like old-school Columbo. It was smart, built up slowly, and was full of small moments that added up to something big. But the project hit a wall, even though the story was done and Falk was ready to go. ABC didn't want it because they had been showing Columbo movies for years. The reason is Falk's age. It was clear to network executives that they didn't want a TV movie with an 80-year-old lead. One of the people who made the choice, Charles Angel, said, "No one wants to buy a movie with an 80-year-old lead." It didn't matter that Falk was already in his 70s and still played Columbo, or that Columbo's whole charm came from the fact that people didn't think much of him. No one could move the networks. Universal tried to get investors from other countries, thinking that the detective's popularity around the world would be enough. But the progress stopped when it didn't have a big U.S. network behind it. The worst blow then came. In 2007, Falk's health began to get worse. The people who knew him well started to notice changes after he had some dental work done. His memory began to fade. Not long after that, it was proven that Falk had Alzheimer's. The finding was made public in 2008, and it was already clear that there was damage. The man who used to play a TV detective who was smarter than everyone else couldn't even remember that his name was Columbo. After that, his daughter told the judge that he no longer recognized known faces, including hers. It was clear by 2009 that there would not be a final show. The carefully planned goodbye would never be caught on film. Falk died in 2011 at the age of 83. He died of problems caused by pneumonia and Alzheimer's, and Columbo died with him. With his rumpled coat and tired look, Peter Falk looked like a detective. But behind that lazy look was a man who took his work more seriously than anyone else. Falk was Columbo, not just a character. Never mind how much it cost the studio, he brought his own clothes to the set and demanded that every detail be just right. A simple 10-day shoot could last 2 weeks because Falk would stop in the middle of a scene to change a line or look into why a character did what they did. People who tried to push him would generally feel bad about it. Even people who work for studios knew not to fight. That well-known raincoat wasn't from closet. It was his. That mumbling, rambling style was planned out very carefully. That way, Falk kept the actors guessing, which kept their responses real. It worked. Columbo seemed like someone you knew. You might not have been able to figure out what made him tick, but not everyone got along with Falk. Danny Kaye's name came up when the makers were looking for people to be in the episode Negative Reaction. Since he was a big star, most people would have jumped at the chance, but Falk said no. Anyone know the reason? It's the only time he's ever stopped someone from going on the show. Some people think it was because they had worked together in comedy before, and Falk didn't want Columbo to become a joke. Some people think it was just a clash of styles. Falk wouldn't move either way. He ran the show, and if he thought someone didn't belong, they were kicked out. It's that easy. While Falk was trying to take over the set, the writers were having a different kind of nightmare. Columbo was very different from other crime shows because it started with a murder. Since there wasn't going to be a surprise finish, writers had to build tension from the beginning instead. A lot of people found it tiring. Only 2 of the 60 skilled writers that NBC asked to watch a pilot were interested in writing for the show. That's how hard it was. That's why the writer's room turned into a pressure cooker. They locked themselves in rooms all day to come up with ideas, and sometimes they would grab anyone who walked by to help them fix a storyline that was stuck. Lawrence Cohen stopped by to say hello and left with a writing job because he could solve a story problem that no one else could. Things got worse when NBC chose to make the episodes 2 hours long. There were extra scenes in the scripts that didn't add anything to the story, and many people thought the quality started to drop. Then something very strange took place. Columbo blew up again many years after it was over, this time with a different group of people. From 2020 to 2023, 300% more people streamed the show. Because of the pandemic, many people were stuck at home and found comfort in Columbo's slow, thoughtful pace. Young people loved how the show made fun of the rich because most of the killers were spoiled rich people who thought they were safe. They kept coming back to Earth with Columbo's war, not shoes and soft voice. Also, social media was helpful. Fan mods for Among Us, TikTok, and other sites all started to show love for the scruffy detective who always got his man. Then there were jokes. All of a sudden, Columbo cuts were everywhere. On Twitter, someone thought of him as a 3-inch, all-police officer who solved small crimes. In a parody movie, he looked into Tumblr posts, and his strange habits became very important to his fans. The woman he never saw, the old Pujo, that unforgettable line, "One more thing." He was more well known on the internet than ever before, but he hadn't changed a thing. He was still the same humble genius who used kindness and confusion to catch killers. Peter Falk held on to that part the whole time. With that role, he won 5 Emmys and even after decades kept working to make it better. People of all ages still argue about whether Columbo was just lucky or truly very smart. It could be both. That's what made it beautiful. You never knew for sure if he was messing up or not. You knew what was going on, but he already did.